When her skin became a target for cruel taunts of injustice, Nurse Maya concealed the pain that threatened to shatter her dignity and spirit. Every scornful glance and cutting word left deep marks on her heart, yet each wound only strengthened her resolve. This is the beginning of a story forged in humiliation, a journey that will reveal the raw, painful truth behind the struggles and indomitable hope of a black nurse. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. In the heart of the city, where the hum of everyday life blended with the echo of hurried footsteps, there stood a grand hospital pulsing with life and the constant buzz of hope and healing. Its large glass windows reflected the restless energy of an urban maze, while inside, every corridor told a story of resilience and quiet determination. The air was thick with the clean scent of antiseptics, mixed with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee wafting from a small break room, and an undercurrent of anxiety from those waiting for a miracle. Beeping monitors, hushed conversations, and the soft clatter of rolling carts created a symphony that underscored the fragile balance between despair and hope. Every day in this sanctuary of healing, Nurse Maya moved with quiet purpose. With smooth, dark skin and a warm, unwavering smile, she carried an aura of strength and empathy. Growing up in a modest neighborhood where every act of kindness was a form of survival, Maya had learned early on that healing went far beyond the physical. Each shift, she donned her crisp uniform with pride and stepped into the hospital as if stepping into a battleground against pain and injustice. Her heart, well acquainted with life's hardships, beat with a deep resolve to offer every person the dignity and care they deserved. Maya's path to becoming a nurse was paved with challenges and triumphs. She remembered childhood evenings filled with the laughter of family and the soft lullabies of her mother, whose gentle words taught her to see beauty even in struggle. Those memories, tender yet resilient, fueled her desire to help others. Every patient she cared for was more than just a case. They were lives layered with hidden stories, scars both seen and unseen. She believed that every soul could be soothed with a little compassion, even if it meant reaching into the darkest corners of human experience. In stark contrast to Maya's gentle warmth was Harold Thompson, a patient whose very presence exuded a rigidity born of years steeped in old prejudices. With silver hair and a stern, furrowed brow, Harold carried an air of authority that had once commanded respect. Yet beneath his imposing exterior lay a hardened heart, marred by a lifetime of nurturing narrow views and old-world biases. As he was wheeled into the treatment room, his eyes flickered with an unmistakable disdain, and his critical gaze took in every detail with suspicion. Unbeknownst to him, the events unfolding within these walls would soon challenge the very fabric of his beliefs. The hospital was a microcosm of society, a tapestry woven with diverse threads. Alongside Maya and Harold, other figures played their quiet roles. There was Dr. Emily, a soft-spoken physician whose gentle tone and steady hands could calm even the most troubled spirit, and Samuel, a longtime janitor whose silent observations spoke volumes of the countless lives he had witnessed. Each person contributed in their own way to the delicate balance of care and order within the busy urban haven. As the day advanced, the hospital corridors became stages for countless human dramas. Families gathered in waiting areas, their eyes brimming with hope and trepidation. The rhythmic beeping of machines intermingled with the soft murmur of voices, creating a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting dancing patterns on polished floors, as if promising clarity amidst the chaos. It was in this very atmosphere that fate was quietly orchestrating a tale of unexpected transformation. Maya, with her inherent kindness and keen sensitivity, soon found herself assigned to care for Harold. Initially unaware of the depths of his prejudice, she soon encountered the biting tone in his responses and the subtle, yet unmistakable, hints of racism in his words. Still, her calm never wavered. Understanding that pain often disguises itself as anger, she recognized that his hostility was perhaps a protective shield fashioned by years of hurt and isolation. Gently, she approached him as she would any wounded soul. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly while adjusting his pillow, her voice steady and kind, "I am here to help you feel better, not just in body, but in spirit." I know it may be hard for you to accept care from someone like me, but every person deserves kindness." Her words, free of judgment and full of sincere invitation, floated in the sterile air, attempting to bridge a gap built over decades. Harold's initial response was cold and dismissive. His eyes narrowed, and he murmured in a tone that barely concealed his inner turmoil, "I don't need your help." Yet beneath that curt reply lay a tremor, a sign of vulnerability that he fought to keep hidden. Each encounter with Maya was a silent battle between his long-held beliefs and the undeniable pull of compassion. In quiet moments when the soft hum of the machines provided a gentle backdrop, Maya caught glimpses of sorrow flickering in his eyes, a fleeting recognition of the hurt that lay buried beneath years of prejudice. Outside their shared room, the hospital buzzed with life. The distant sound of sirens, the murmuring chatter of passers-by, and the gentle rustle of leaves in a nearby courtyard all painted a picture of a world that continued, indifferent to the intimate struggles within these walls. Yet within this microcosm, every gesture of care, every soft-spoken word, and every unguarded moment between nurse and patient carried the weight of possible change. As the hours slipped by, the interplay between Maya's compassion and Harold's guarded hostility began to reveal subtle shifts. In the midst of routine checks and small talk, hints of transformation emerged. Maya's unwavering commitment to empathy clashed with Harold's defensive demeanor, a collision of worlds that, unbeknownst to them both, promised to reshape their lives. In the sterile light of the hospital room, the air grew thick with unspoken questions about identity, worth, and the possibility of redemption. It was as if every beep of the monitor, every whisper of the wind through the slightly ajar window, carried a secret message that even the most hardened hearts could soften with time. Later that day, as dusk crept slowly over the city, the hospital took on a new, introspective tone. The harsh glare of fluorescent lights mellowed into gentle shadows, and the once busy corridors became places of quiet reflection. In a small waiting area lined with worn chairs that had comforted countless souls, Maya paused to savor a rare moment of calm. The comforting scent of freshly laundered linens mingled with the subtle aroma of jasmine from a vase on a nearby table. In that moment, she allowed herself to reflect on the path that had led her here, on the sacrifices made, the moments of quiet resilience, and the unyielding hope that had fueled her journey. In a parallel solitude, Harold lay awake in his room, surrounded by the quiet hum of life-saving machines and the distant murmur of the hospital beyond his door. His mind was a battleground where memories of past wounds and the rigidity of his prejudices waged a silent war against the gentle encroachments of new, unsettling emotions. The persistent cadence of Nurse Maya's kind words echoed in his thoughts, challenging the narrative he had clung to for so long. In the interplay of light and shadow on the sterile walls, he found himself questioning the very foundations of his identity, a man molded by years of narrow-mindedness, now faced with the possibility of change. As night settled, the hospital's ambience softened further. A quiet volunteer named Rachel drifted along the corridors, her footsteps barely audible as she moved from room to room, offering a few kind words to those in need. Her presence, like a whispered promise, reminded everyone that healing was not solely the domain of doctors and nurses, but a collective effort that spanned every corner of the building. Even Samuel, the wise janitor, observed silently as if each patient and each act of care were part of an ongoing, sacred ritual. In the stillness of the night, the hospital transformed into a haven where every soul was gently forced to confront its inner truths. For Maya, the late hours were moments of both exhaustion and quiet determination, a time when the weight of the day's emotional labor was felt most deeply. She recalled the many times she had faced harsh stares or dismissive remarks outside these walls, yet here she found strength in the belief that each act of kindness could chip away at even the most stubborn of barriers. Her heart, still tender from personal past hurts, brimmed with an almost sacred resolve to mend the unseen scars of prejudice and pain. Harold, alone in his dimly lit room, experienced a tumult of emotions. The isolation he had long known now felt like a mirror reflecting the dissonance within, a clash between the familiar comfort of old prejudices and the unfamiliar, tender stirrings of hope. The soft rustle of bed linens and the gentle hum of a distant clock became companions in his struggle, each tick a reminder that time, inexorable and relentless, could bring change if one allowed it. In the silent recesses of his mind, a faint but persistent voice questioned whether the barriers he had built might finally be crumbling. By the time the hospital settled into the quiet rhythms of the night shift, the seeds of transformation had been sown. In a small moment before leaving Harold's room, Maya paused at his bedside, her eyes meeting him in a silent exchange that conveyed both understanding and hope. "I know change can be hard," she whispered, her voice gentle enough to almost blend with the ambient hum of machinery, "but every heart has the power to heal if given a chance." There was no judgment in her tone, only a steadfast belief in the possibility of redemption. The following morning, the first light of dawn filtered softly through the hospital windows, illuminating corridors that had witnessed the night's tender revelations. In the break room, while colleagues shared quiet smiles over steaming cups of coffee, Maya sat in reflective silence, her mind still swirling with the emotions of the past hours. The aroma of fresh coffee and pastries mixed with the promise of a new day, a day that held the possibility of continuing the slow, deliberate work of healing hearts. In the ward where Harold now lay, a subtle yet profound change was already in motion. The clinical sterility of his room was softened by the presence of quiet empathy. His eyes, once filled solely with suspicion and hardened resolve, now occasionally revealed fleeting moments of uncertainty. As he lay there, the soft rustle of bed sheets and the distant murmur of hospital life provided a backdrop to his inner dialogue. The echoes of Nurse Maya's gentle words continued to challenge him, stirring emotions he had long suppressed. Throughout the day, as Nurse Maya went about her duties, every interaction became a small testament to the transformative power of genuine care. Whether it was a brief smile exchanged with a frightened child or quiet conversation with a weary elderly patient, each moment was a stitch in the intricate fabric of hope that the hospital wove every day. In the soft murmur of shared laughter, the whispered thanks of a relieved patient, and the steady cadence of her own footsteps, Maya felt a deep conviction that kindness, however small, could alter the course of a life. In the busy corridors, where life continued with a rhythm that was both relentless and tender, the story of Nurse Maya and Harold Thompson began to take shape, a story not of dramatic heroics, but of quiet moments where hearts met and barriers slowly crumbled. The hospital, with its blend of harsh realities and gentle interludes, became the silent witness to a transformation that was as delicate as it was profound. As dusk once again began to cast its soft glow over the city, the hospital's atmosphere grew even more reflective. The long shadows danced upon the floors, and the interplay of light and dark mirrored the internal struggles of those within. In a brief moment of respite, as Maya paused to collect her thoughts by a window overlooking a busy street, she allowed herself to marvel at the resilience of the human spirit. The cacophony of urban life outside, distant traffic, murmuring passers-by, and the rustle of leaves seemed to echo the quiet hope that every day carried the possibility of a better tomorrow. In Harold's room, the quiet of evening brought a rare moment of introspection. His thoughts, once rigid and unyielding, now meandered through memories of a past filled with both pain and lost opportunities. The persistent kindness of Nurse Maya had done more than merely tend to his physical wounds. It had begun to chip away at the hardened armor that had defined him for so long. In the soft, embracing quiet of the hospital night, the seeds of change had taken root, promising that even the most entrenched beliefs could one day give way to understanding and empathy. As the day drew to a close and the gentle hum of the night settled in once more, the hospital stood as a quiet monument to the delicate interplay of human emotion, a place where every act of care, every tender word, and every moment of shared humanity whispered of a future where compassion could bridge even the widest divides. Nurse Maya, with her unwavering dedication, and Harold Thompson, with the faint stirrings of a changed heart, were now bound by a journey that had only just begun, a journey that would test the limits of prejudice and reveal the true transformative power of empathy. In the soft embrace of twilight, as the hospital's lights dimmed and the world outside hushed into a quiet lull, the promise of a new day shimmered on the horizon. It was a promise that every small act of kindness could ignite a spark of hope, that every heart, no matter how scarred, held the capacity for change. And so, as the hospital prepared for another night of quiet struggle and hopeful anticipation, the silent narrative of Nurse Maya and Harold Thompson continued to unfold, a narrative woven from the threads of compassion, vulnerability, and the enduring belief that even the most deeply entrenched prejudices could one day melt away in the light of genuine human connection. In that gentle, lingering silence, where the echoes of the day's small miracles merged with the soft murmur of night, the first chapter of their shared journey came to a close, a chapter defined not by a grand finale, but by the quiet certainty that the seeds of transformation had been sown. Every whispered word, every caring touch, and every thoughtful glance was a promise of what was to come, a promise that even in a world marred by injustice and old wounds, there lay the possibility of redemption and a future built on the steadfast foundation of empathy. And so, in the peaceful aftermath of a long day, with the city's first light beginning to break over the horizon, the hospital remained a sanctuary where hope, though fragile, was nurtured with every passing moment. The lives of Nurse Maya and Harold Thompson, intertwined in unexpected ways, were poised on the edge of a profound change, a change that would challenge the very essence of who they were and what they believed. In the quiet spaces between heartbeats and in the tender silence of shared understanding, their story had only just begun to whisper its truth, a truth that promised that compassion, in its purest form, could indeed transform even the most hardened of souls. The next day dawned with a cool, muted light filtering through the hospital windows, casting long, soft shadows along the quiet corridors. The early morning was a gentle reminder of hope in a place where every day held its own battles and small victories. In the stillness before the rush of the day, the hospital exuded a fragile calm, a calm that belied the undercurrents of tension steadily building within its walls. Nurse Maya began her shift with a silent determination. As she moved through the familiar halls, her steps were measured and her eyes attuned to every detail, the polished floors that reflected the pale light, the distant hum of machines, and even the faint aroma of disinfectant mixed with the lingering sweetness of overnight flowers placed on the nurse's station. Each of these small details spoke to her of the delicate balance between care and the harsh realities of life. She paused for a moment by Harold Thompson's room, drawing a slow breath before entering, already aware that today might bring challenges beyond the routine. Inside Harold's room, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Harold lay in bed, his eyes fixed on a spot on the ceiling that seemed to offer him refuge from the present moment. The earlier night's soft transformation had given way to a familiar hardness, as his mind wrestled with the gentle reminders of compassion that Nurse Maya had so patiently offered. He shifted slightly, the rustle of the crisp white sheets echoing his inner turmoil. When Maya stepped closer, carrying a tray of his morning medications and a steaming cup of tea, the air between them felt charged with anticipation. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Maya said softly, her tone imbued with genuine care as she adjusted the 4-line and checked his pulse. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and for a second, it seemed as if the silence held a promise of understanding that had yet to be fully realized. Harold's gaze, however, remained guarded. "Morning," he replied curtly, his voice low and edged with habitual reserve. As Maya set about her work, she carefully measured his medication and refilled his water, all the while trying to bridge the gap between them with quiet conversation. "The weather is clear today," she ventured, attempting a small, neutral observation. "It always makes me think that even after the darkest night, the light comes back." Harold's eyes flickered briefly, a subtle crack in his defensive armor. "Light or no light, some nights are best left in the dark," he muttered, more to himself than to her. His words, though softly delivered, carried a weight that hinted at a lifetime spent clinging to old resentments and hidden hurts. Later, as the day unfolded, the hospital buzzed with the familiar cadence of routine care. In the bustling nurse's station, Maya found a moment to exchange a few words with Dr. Emily, whose calm demeanor belied an inner strength that had seen many patients through the worst of times. "Harold seems particularly troubled today," Dr. Emily remarked quietly, glancing toward the corridor leading to his room. "I know he's been difficult, but I sense there's more behind his hostility." Maya nodded, her brow creasing in concern. "I feel it too. There's a deep pain in his eyes, even when he tries to hide it. I just wish I knew how to reach him beyond the walls he's built up." The empathy in her voice was unmistakable, resonating with the years of hardship she had witnessed and the quiet determination that had brought her to this line of work. Throughout the morning, minor setbacks began to unravel the fragile calm of Harold's recovery. A misplaced medication dosage here, a misunderstanding with a visiting family member there. Each small incident added a new layer to the tension simmering just below the surface. At one point, a heated conversation broke out in the corridor between a family member of another patient and a staff nurse, their voices rising in a clash of accusations and defensive explanations. Although unrelated to Harold directly, the echo of discord seemed to reverberate within him, stirring up memories of past grievances and intensifying the bitterness he harbored. In one such moment, Harold's eyes darted to the commotion as he lay in his bed. The voices, sharp and unforgiving, reminded him of a time when he had felt utterly powerless and alone, a time when the world had been unkind to those who dared to be different. His knuckles whitened around the blanket, and for a fleeting second, his hardened expression softened into something that might have been regret, if only the warmth of the moment were given space to breathe. Later, when Maya returned to his room with a freshly laundered set of sheets, Harold's retort was immediate and laced with familiar disdain. "Do you really think a change of sheets can make me feel better?" he snapped, his voice rising just enough to betray the storm inside him. Maya paused, her hand hovering in the air as if weighing her next words with the utmost care. "I believe that even small gestures can begin to mend the wounds of the past," she said gently. "Sometimes comfort starts with something as simple as a clean place to rest." Her words, intended as a balm, only deepened the lines of anger on his face. "You say that as if your kindness can wash away years of truth," Harold replied bitterly, his tone filled with both challenge and despair. His eyes, dark and stormy, locked with hers in a silent battle where pride met the possibility of change. Maya did not respond immediately, instead allowing the quiet hum of the room to speak for her, a quiet resolve that refused to be undermined by harsh words. The day continued with small, almost imperceptible shifts. As afternoon crept in, a visitor arrived, a middle-aged man whose warm smile and easy demeanor brought a subtle contrast to the tension that had marked the morning. The man, who introduced himself simply as David, was Harold's estranged son, a revelation that sent ripples through the already delicate fabric of Harold's self-image. David's presence was both a challenge and an opportunity, a chance for reconciliation that Harold had long resisted. Their reunion in the quiet confines of the hospital room was tentative, marked by long silences and the careful navigation of old wounds. Maya observed from a respectful distance, her heart aching for the family's unspoken sorrow. David's words were gentle, his tone laced with regret and longing. "Dad, I'm here because I want us to find a way forward," he said softly, reaching out as if to bridge the gap that had formed over years of neglect and misunderstanding. Harold's response was a mixture of anger and pain, his eyes flaring before he managed to look away. "I don't need any help," he insisted, his voice trembling with a mix of indignation and despair. Yet beneath his harsh words, there was a vulnerability that neither David nor Maya could ignore, a vulnerability that hinted at the possibility of change, if only it were nurtured with patience and understanding. As the conversation unfolded, Maya's presence in the room became a silent witness to the raw, unfiltered emotions laid bare. Her gentle interjections and quiet reassurances served as a counterpoint to the clashing voices of the family, each word a small seed of empathy in a soil long hardened by bitterness. Family is a bond that can sometimes be fragile, yet it remains unbreakable in its potential to heal, she remarked softly, her words lingering in the air like a prayer for reconciliation. Harold's eyes darted towards her, as if her calm conviction challenged the long-held barriers he had built around himself. Outside the room, in the dimly lit corridor, Samuel the janitor moved silently with his cart, his eyes absorbing every detail of the unfolding drama. Having spent decades observing the subtle nuances of human behavior in the hospital, he understood that moments like these, fraught with tension and the promise of change, were the turning points in many lives. Samuel's quiet presence was a reminder that every individual, no matter how hardened, was capable of transformation when given the chance. As the hours passed, the undercurrent of conflict grew stronger. In a brief moment between rounds, Harold, feeling cornered by his own inner demons, lashed out with words that cut through the fragile peace of the room. "You all think you know what's best for me," he shouted at the gathering of concerned voices, family, staff, and even a few curious onlookers from the adjacent hallway. His voice, rising above the gentle hum of the hospital, carried an edge that was both desperate and defiant. "I have lived my life the way I see fit, and I will not be lectured by a nurse, a doctor, or anyone who dares to pretend they understand me." Maya's heart ached at the sound of his outburst, but she remained steadfast. She stepped forward, her voice soft yet imbued with a quiet authority. "Mr. Thompson, I know you have your reasons, and I won't force you to change. "But please understand that I am here to help, not to judge," she said, her eyes pleading for him to see beyond his anger. The intensity in her gaze spoke of a deep reservoir of compassion, a compassion born from years of witnessing both the suffering and resilience of those around her. Harold's eyes flashed with a mix of fury and sorrow. "Help? You call this help?" he retorted bitterly, his words echoing in the silence that followed. The room fell into a heavy pause, each person present feeling the weight of his pain. In that charged moment, the fragile veneer of control he had maintained began to crack, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. His chest heaved with the force of his emotions, and for a moment, even the sharp edges of his prejudice softened into something that resembled regret. The tension in the room was palpable, a living, breathing entity that seemed to press in from all sides. Outside, the hospital corridors buzzed with routine activity, but inside Harold's room, time appeared to slow down. Every heartbeat, every measured breath was a testament to the inner battle raging within him, a battle between the old, rigid beliefs that had defined his life and a budding realization that perhaps, just perhaps, change was not entirely beyond his reach. Over the next few hours, the hospital's rhythm continued, but the air around Harold's room remained thick with unresolved conflict. Conversations in hushed tones drifted into the room from a hallway, snatches of dialogue between nurses and doctors, discussions about his treatment, and even murmurs of speculation about his past. It was during one of these quiet moments that Maya, in a rare instant of privacy, confided in Dr. Emily. "There's something in his eyes," she whispered, "something that tells me his anger is a shield, not his true self. I feel like there's a story there, a history of hurt that we've barely begun to understand." Dr. Emily, ever the voice of reason and empathy, nodded slowly. "Often the greatest battles are fought within ourselves," she replied, her tone soft and contemplative. "Perhaps one day he will let go of his pain and see that the kindness you offer is not meant to diminish him, but to help him heal." That evening, as the hospital settled into the subdued cadence of the night shift, the building itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The day's events had left an indelible mark on everyone involved, and the interplay of hope and despair was written on every face. Harold, still wrestling with his inner demons, lay awake long after the corridors had quieted. In the dim light of his room, the shadows seemed to dance with the echoes of the day's confrontations, and every small sound, the faint beeping of a monitor, the soft rustle of a nurse's step, became a reminder of the unresolved tensions that had come to define his existence. In a moment of rare solitude, Harold found himself revisiting fragments of memories he had long suppressed. A recollection of his childhood, filled with moments of warmth and love, surfaced unbidden, images of a time when he had once been open to the world's possibilities. But these memories were quickly overshadowed by the harsh realities of his adult life, a life marred by loss, bitterness, and a series of decisions that had led him down a path of isolation. As he grappled with the conflicting emotions, a subtle yet persistent voice in the recesses of his mind questioned the cost of his long-held prejudices. Could it be that the barriers he had so carefully constructed were nothing more than fragile walls, destined to crumble under the relentless pressure of compassion? Meanwhile, Nurse Maya moved through the hospital with a quiet intensity that belied the chaos of her inner thoughts. Every interaction she had was imbued with a deep-seated belief that even the most hardened hearts could be softened by kindness. Yet, as she tended to her duties, she could not shake the image of Harold's anguished eyes, the way they seemed to plead for a release from the shackles of his own making. In quiet moments during her rounds, she would pause, leaning against a cold, tiled wall, and silently wonder what it would take to break through the barriers that he had so meticulously built around himself. As the night deepened, a storm began to brew both outside and within the walls of the hospital. Rain pattered softly against the window panes, its steady rhythm echoing the unspoken tension in Harold's room. In a sudden burst of vulnerability, Harold's thoughts turned to David once more. The thought of his estranged son, of the years lost and the words left unspoken, hit him with a force that left him gasping. In the solitude of the darkened room, the full weight of his isolation pressed down on him, and for a moment, his eyes welled with unshed tears. The rage that had defined him all these years now mingled with a profound sorrow, hinting at a transformation that was both painful and inevitable. In the corridor outside, Samuel paused by a window, watching the rain cascade down in silvery sheets. He had seen many nights like this, where the storm outside mirrored the turbulence within. With a knowing sigh, He continued on his slow, deliberate path, his mind reflecting on the nature of human resilience and the quiet strength that often went unnoticed in moments of vulnerability. It was in the midst of this charged atmosphere that a conversation took an unexpected turn. A young intern, whose eyes still held the brightness of unjaded hope, approached Maya as she was compiling notes for the night shift. "Nurse Maya," the intern began hesitantly, "I've noticed that Mr. Thompson seems different these days. There's a change, however subtle, in the way he reacts. Do you think there's hope for him?" The question, innocent yet laden with the weight of unspoken empathy, caught Maya's attention. She paused, choosing her words with care. "Every person carries a story, and sometimes it takes a bit of time for them to be ready to share it," she replied softly. "I believe that beneath his harsh words lies a wounded soul, one that is slowly learning that the world can be kinder than he thinks." The intern nodded slowly, as if absorbing a lesson that went beyond textbooks and theories. The conversation lingered in the air, a quiet promise of change, even as the night pressed on with its relentless intensity. As the hours wore on, the simmering tension reached a crescendo. In a quiet corner of the hospital's common area, a heated discussion broke out between Harold and a visiting relative who had come to urge him to accept further treatment. The relative's words, though intended with care, struck Harold as yet another attempt to control his destiny, a reminder of the failures and losses that had defined his life. "You think you know what's best for me," Harold shouted, his voice echoing with a mix of desperation and defiance. "But I have lived my life my way, and I won't let anyone change that now." His words reverberated in the small space, drawing the attention of passers-by and deepening the sense of conflict that had been building for so long. In that charged moment, Maya appeared once more at his bedside, her presence a steady beacon of calm amidst the storm. "Mr. Thompson," she said gently, placing a hand on his arm, "I understand your pain, and I know that change can feel like a threat. But sometimes opening yourself up to a little compassion can be the first step toward healing." Her voice was soft, yet it carried an undeniable firmness, a blend of empathy and quiet strength that seemed to momentarily quiet the raging tempest within him. Harold's eyes flashed with anger and pain as he pulled his arm away. "You don't understand," he spat, his tone bitter. "You can't understand the years I've spent fighting against a world that never cared to see me for who I am." His words, raw and unfiltered, hung in the air like a challenge. For a long, heavy moment, the silence that followed was broken only by the soft, steady drip of rain from the window, a sound that seemed to punctuate the weight of his admission. In the aftermath of that confrontation, the hospital's atmosphere shifted subtly. The murmurs in the corridors took on an edge of anticipation, as if everyone sensed that something significant was on the horizon. Even as Harold retreated back into the solitude of his room, his internal battle continued to wage with a fervor that promised both destruction and renewal. Maya, too, was left to grapple with the consequences of the day's events. She spent a quiet hour by the window in the common lounge, watching the rain and allowing her thoughts to wander through the tangled web of human emotions she encountered daily. In those reflective moments, she considered the possibility that Harold's outbursts were not solely born of hatred, but of a deep-seated fear, a fear of vulnerability, of being hurt all over again. "Imagine if you were in his shoes," she thought, carrying the weight of a lifetime of pain and isolation. "Would you be so quick to shut the door on someone trying to help?" The thought lingered, a quiet echo that mingled with the rhythmic pattern of rain and the distant sound of a lone clock ticking away the minutes. As night deepened further, a peculiar silence settled over the hospital. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath in anticipation of a revelation, a twist that had been slowly hinted at through the day's events. In the dim light of a hallway, a conversation between two nurses revealed a subtle piece of information that had previously gone unnoticed. "Did you hear what Mr. Thompson said earlier?" one nurse whispered to the other. "There was something in his tone, a hint that maybe he's not as set in his ways as he seems." The remark, though casual, sent a ripple of curiosity through the staff. It was as if a small, unnoticed crack had appeared in the fortress of his prejudice, a crack that might one day widen into a channel for change. Even Harold, in his solitude, could not escape the stirrings of an internal reckoning. As he lay back against the cool pillows, memories of a long-forgotten conversation with his late wife surfaced. She had once told him, in gentle tones, that every heart could learn to love again, that forgiveness was a strength rather than a weakness. The memory was bittersweet, a reminder of a time when life had held promise and warmth before fear and bitterness had taken root. Now, as he fought against the darkness of his own making, that long-dormant voice began to whisper in the quiet recesses of his mind, challenging the narratives he had clung to for so long. In a moment of unexpected clarity, Harold sat up, his eyes glistening in the faint light. He stared out the narrow window, the rain washing over the glass in a cascade of shimmering droplets. The world outside, despite its stormy chaos, seemed full of possibility, a stark contrast to the inner desolation he had nurtured for years. For a fleeting second, he wondered if the rigid lines of his prejudice might finally begin to blur, if the kindness of a stranger could reach the parts of him that he had long kept hidden. Yet, even as that thought crossed his mind, he quickly dismissed it with a bitter laugh, as if mocking the very idea of change. The hospital night carried on, its hours marked by the steady rhythm of care and the quiet hum of life continuing despite the turmoil within. Throughout the evening, Nurse Maya continued her work with a grace that belied the storm of emotions swirling beneath the surface. Every patient she attended to, every gentle word she offered, was an act of quiet rebellion against the cruelty of a world that too often rewarded indifference. Yet, even as she moved through the wards with steadfast resolve, her thoughts kept returning to Harold, his eyes, his words, and the unspoken promise of redemption that lay hidden beneath his hardened exterior. At one point, as the night shift was nearing its end, Harold's room became the scene of another small crisis. A sudden spike in his blood pressure set off alarms that jolted both the patient and the staff into immediate action. Dr. Emily and a team of nurses rushed to his side, their voices urgent and measured as they worked to stabilize him. Amid the commotion, Harold's face contorted in pain and anger, his earlier outbursts now transforming into silent screams of despair. Maya knelt by his bedside, her hands steady as she monitored his vitals and whispered soft reassurances. "I'm here, Mr. Thompson. We're going to get through this together," she said, her voice a gentle anchor in the midst of chaos. For those few agonizing minutes, time seemed to stretch on infinitely. Every beep of the monitor, every whispered instruction from a medical team, added to the crescendo of tension that filled the room. Harold's eyes, now wide with a mixture of fear and something like dawning realization, searched Maya's face for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. And then, as quickly as the crisis had erupted, the storm began to recede. The medical team managed to stabilize his condition, and a tentative calm settled over the room once more. Yet the incident left an indelible mark, a reminder that the delicate balance between life and despair could shatter at any moment, and that the forces of change, however subtle, were never far away. In the quiet aftermath of the crisis, as the night's tension slowly ebbed, Harold found himself alone with his thoughts once again. The storm had passed, leaving behind a charged silence that seemed to vibrate with possibility. He lay back on his pillow, the events of the day replaying in his mind like fragments of a long-forgotten dream. There were moments of anger, moments of raw vulnerability, and even glimpses of a future that he had never dared to imagine. The echoes of Nurse Maya's gentle words mingled with the remnants of his own bitter retorts, creating a dissonant symphony that resonated deep within his soul. Outside his room, the hospital continued its nocturnal vigil. In the quiet corners of the building, whispered conversations and knowing glances passed between the staff, each person silently acknowledging that something was shifting in the fabric of their daily lives. Even Samuel, as he pushed his cart down a dim corridor, felt the subtle change, a sense that the steadfast walls of prejudice were beginning to show tiny fractures under the relentless pressure of compassion. By the time the first hints of dawn began to break through the dark, stormy night, the day's struggles had woven themselves into the very tapestry of the hospital. The rising tension, the moments of confrontation and vulnerability, all pointed toward an inevitable reckoning, a reckoning that promised to bring forth truths long buried under layers of fear and resentment. Nurse Maya, exhausted yet resolute, prepared for the coming day with a heart full of hope, even as she carried the weight of each challenging moment in her mind. In the quiet early hours, as the world outside slowly awoke and the soft light of a new day crept in, Harold lay awake, his thoughts a tumult of regret and possibility. He remembered the day's heated words, the fleeting moments when his hardened resolve had faltered in the face of genuine care. The quiet introspection brought with it the painful awareness of all that he had lost, and perhaps all that he still might lose if he continued down the path of isolation. Yet in the midst of that uncertainty, there lingered a small, stubborn ember of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, the kindness he had long denied could spark a change that was both profound and irreversible. As the hospital stirred to life once more, with nurses bustling and doctors hurrying to greet the day's challenges, the echoes of the previous night's struggles remained. Each interaction, each careful word, served as a reminder that the human heart was as fragile as it was resilient. And in that fragile resilience lay the promise of redemption, a promise that, in time, might bridge the chasm between a man defined by his prejudices and a future filled with unexpected compassion. In the coming hours, the threads of conflict and reconciliation continued to intertwine. David, the estranged son, returned briefly to check on his father, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and cautious optimism. In a quiet, almost tentative conversation held in the sterile privacy of the room, he spoke softly of lost time and the possibility of rebuilding what had been broken. Harold, for his part, listened in silence, his face a mask of conflict as old resentments warred with the yearning for a connection he had long denied himself. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," he murmured at one point, his voice barely audible. "But maybe I'm not as sure about everything as I once was." Those words, tentative and unsteady, were like fragile cracks in the armor of his convictions, cracks that, with time and care, might widen into channels for healing. Maya watched this delicate exchange from the doorway, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She knew that the road ahead was fraught with obstacles, that the deep-seated biases and old wounds would not simply vanish overnight. Yet, in the earnest vulnerability of Harold's whispered confession, she saw a glimmer of the change she had long believed possible, a change born not of forced transformation, but of a genuine, if painful, awakening. In the soft light of late morning, as the hospital settled into the routine of a new day, the lingering echoes of the previous night's tensions continued to shape the unfolding narrative. Conversations in quiet corners spoke of hope and redemption, while the unspoken understanding among the staff hinted at a collective belief in the transformative power of compassion. Every gesture, a kind word, a shared glance of understanding, a moment of quiet empathy, served as a silent promise that even the most entrenched barriers could one day be overcome. And so, as the day progressed with its familiar mix of urgency and tenderness, the seeds of change, planted in the stormy soil of conflict and nurtured by every act of care, continued to grow. Harold's journey, fraught with moments of anger, pain, and reluctant introspection, was slowly beginning to mirror the quiet evolution unfolding in the hearts of those around him. The hospital, with all its trials and triumphs, had become a crucible where the raw elements of prejudice, vulnerability, and empathy were being melded into something new, a testament to the enduring possibility of human transformation. In the final hours before dusk, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the hospital's corridors, the rising tension reached a point of poised climax. A particularly charged conversation between Harold and a visiting family member, filled with both harsh words and unspoken truths, broke the fragile calm. "I have lived in a world that never showed me kindness," Harold declared, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow, "and I have built these walls to protect myself. But maybe I'm tired of living behind them." His words, raw and unguarded, hung in the air like a challenge to the long-held beliefs that had defined him. Maya, standing silently by the window, felt her heart tighten at his confession. It was as if the layers of pain and prejudice were beginning to peel away, revealing a wounded soul desperate for healing. The moment was charged with the promise of an unexpected twist, a turning point that would not only redefine Harold's path, but also set the stage for a deeper, more profound transformation in them both. In the hush that followed, the hospital seemed to breathe in unison with the hearts of those who dwelled within its walls. Every patient, every caregiver, every quiet observer was part of a larger, unfolding narrative, a narrative that spoke of struggle and redemption, of conflict and the tender possibility of change. And as the day gave way to night, once more the subtle, persistent hope that had been kindled throughout the hours glowed like a beacon in the darkness. By the time the hospital settled into the reflective silence of the late evening, the events of the day had woven themselves into a complex tapestry of human emotion. The rising tension and conflict that had marked the hours were now tempered by moments of vulnerability and the quiet promise of redemption. Harold, though still guarded and conflicted, had allowed himself a glimpse of the possibility that the kindness extended to him might one day break through the ironclad shell of prejudice. And Nurse Maya, steadfast in her belief in the healing power of empathy, continued to nurture that fragile hope with every gentle word and caring touch. In the lingering light of dusk, as the hospital's corridors grew dim and the soft murmur of night shift activity began, the story of Nurse Maya and Harold Thompson entered a quiet lull, a pause filled with introspection and the unspoken understanding that something significant was on the horizon. The journey toward change was far from over, and the conflicts of a day had only deepened the mystery of what lay ahead. Yet in the tender interplay of shadow and light, in every measured heartbeat and whispered conversation, the promise of transformation shone through, a promise that even the most deeply held prejudices could eventually give way to the unyielding power of compassion. And so, as the night deepened and the hospital stood as a silent witness to the raw, unfiltered realities of life, the rising tension and conflict that had defined the day slowly gave way to a fragile, tentative hope. Every person in that building, from the most hardened patient to the gentlest caregiver, carried within them the seed of change, a seed nurtured by the belief that no heart was ever too scared to be healed, and no soul too lost to be reached. In the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the delicate interplay of anger and tenderness, the story of Nurse Maya and Harold Thompson continued to unfold, a story that promised that the darkest nights could eventually give way to a dawn filled with unexpected light. As the hospital finally surrendered to the soft embrace of night, the events of the day lingered like echoes in an empty hall. The conflicts, the confrontations, and the whispered confessions all merged into a tapestry of experience that hinted at both sorrow and redemption. In that charged atmosphere, Harold lay awake, his mind a tumult of memories and possibilities, while Maya prepared herself for the challenges of the coming day with unwavering resolve. Both were caught in the quiet, relentless push and pull of transformation, a transformation that had only just begun and whose full impact was yet to be revealed. In the hushed stillness before sleep claimed the weary souls of the hospital, one thing was unmistakable: the seeds of change had been sown deep within the hearts of those who dared to hope. And as the rain continued its soft, steady cadence against the windows, the night became a silent promise, a promise that tomorrow would bring with it new challenges, new conflicts, and perhaps finally the breakthrough that could set a long-forgotten heart free. The day began with an uneasy calm that belied the storm of emotions already gathering inside the hospital walls. In the early morning light, a gentle mist clung to the windows as if trying to wash away the residue of conflict from the previous night. Nurse Maya moved quietly along the corridor, her steps measured, and her heart heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. There was a sense in the air, a mixture of hope and trepidation, that whispered promises of change while warning of the inevitable pain that accompanies transformation. In his room, Harold Thompson lay awake, the events of the past days echoing in his mind. The steady beep of the monitor reminded him that his body was still fighting, even as his heart wrestled with old prejudices and new, unsettling feelings. He stared blankly at the ceiling, each shadow and flicker of light stirring memories he had long tried to suppress. The anger, the bitterness, and the guarded defiance that had defined him for so many years now warred with the faint, persistent murmur of regret. He could not shake the memory of Nurse Maya's soft, persistent words, a gentle insistence that kindness was not weakness, but a strength that could mend even the most broken of souls. Outside his door, the hospital seemed to pulse with quiet urgency. Dr. Emily had made her rounds early, her soft-spoken encouragement and empathetic glances at each patient speaking of a world where healing was as much about the spirit as it was about the body. Samuel, the ever-observant janitor, pushed his cart along the corridors with a slow dignity, his eyes catching glimpses of conversations that hinted at change. Even David, Harold's estranged son, had appeared in the halls that morning with a determined, yet cautious air, a silent plea for reconciliation that trembled in every hesitant step he took. By mid-morning, a palpable tension had built around Harold's room. Nurse Maya had made her regular rounds, her presence a steady beacon of calm in an environment otherwise charged with unspoken emotion. When she entered the room to check his vitals, Harold's eyes, guarded and stormy as ever, met hers. "I'm not feeling any better," he muttered, his voice edged with the same bitter defiance that had greeted her words for so long. Maya's gentle smile did not falter, though her eyes betrayed the worry that had grown with every passing hour. "I know it's hard to see it now," she replied softly, "but sometimes the hardest days lead to the most important changes." Her words, though intended as comfort, only deepened the lines of conflict etched on Harold's face. His breathing grew ragged, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around them as if every shadow was closing in. Then, with a suddenness that startled both of them, Harold's voice rose, a raw, desperate sound that broke the fragile calm. "You don't understand," he shouted, his eyes flashing with a fury that was as much about his pain as it was about his long-held convictions. "You, with your endless kindness, pretending you know what's best for me. I've built these walls for a reason." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she steadied his foreline. "Mr. Thompson, I am not here to judge or control you," she said, her voice calm yet insistent. "I'm here because I believe that you deserve care, and that even in your anger, there is a part of you that still wants to be healed." The words hung in the charged silence, the space between them heavy with unspoken truths. Harold's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape from the unbearable intimacy of the moment. It was then that the door opened quietly and David stepped in. His presence, unexpected yet unmistakably significant, seemed to suspend the confrontation in midair. His face was a mixture of sorrow and determination. "Dad," he said in a low, trembling tone, "we need to talk." The sound of his voice cut through the tension like a knife, and for a brief moment, Harold's anger faltered, replaced by a dawning uncertainty. Harold's eyes narrowed, and he glared at his son as if daring him to cross a line he had long drawn in the sand. "Why now, David? After all these years, why come back?" he demanded, his tone laced with bitterness and disbelief. David hesitated, his gaze shifting from his father to Maya and then back again. I couldn't stand by any longer," he confessed quietly. "I've been carrying something that I can't keep hidden. There's something you need to know about Mama, about her and Nurse Maya." The revelation in David's words made the room pause, as if time itself had still. Harold's features contorted with confusion and dawning apprehension. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice rough and unsteady. David reached into his jacket pocket and slowly pulled out a worn, folded letter. With trembling hands, he unfolded it and held it out for Harold to see. "This is from Mama," he explained, his eyes brimming with a mix of hope and regret. "It's a letter she wrote before she passed, a letter that she entrusted to me for the day when you might be ready to hear the truth." Harold took the letter with shaking fingers, his eyes scanning the familiar, looping handwriting. For a long moment, silence reigned as he read the words that had once belonged to the woman he had loved. The letter spoke of a time when love and compassion transcended all boundaries, a time when Mama had found solace in the unexpected kindness of a nurse who had become her confidant and friend. It revealed that Nurse Maya had been there for her in her darkest hours, offering not just medical care, but friendship that had illuminated her final days. The letter painted a portrait of a woman whose heart was wide enough to embrace every shade of humanity, a woman who had believed that kindness was the only truth worth holding on to. Harold's hands trembled as the weight of the revelation sank in. The image of his late wife, once a source of comfort and certainty, now took on a new, heartbreaking dimension. For years, he had clung to his own narrow perceptions, his prejudices hardened by grief and denial. But the truth in that letter was undeniable, a truth that challenged the very foundation of his beliefs. She trusted her with everything," Harold murmured, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes, which moments ago had burned with defiance, now shone with a dawning realization, a mix of sorrow and shame. Maya's presence in the room was as steady as ever, her eyes soft with empathy as she watched the transformation unfolding before her. "Your wife saw something in all of us," she said gently, stepping closer. "She believed in the goodness of people, even when the world seemed too dark to believe in it. I was there for her because I believed that kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. I never meant to challenge you, but I hope that one day you might see that the heart has a capacity for love far beyond what we sometimes allow ourselves to believe." Harold's breathing was ragged as he grappled with the tumult of emotions swirling inside him. The anger that had defined him for so long began to crumble in the face of the overwhelming truth. "All these years," he said, his voice shaking, "I thought I was protecting myself, protecting what I had built. But I see now that in my fear and in my pride, I lost sight of what truly mattered." His eyes filled with tears that glistened with the weight of regret. "I pushed away the one person who could have helped me heal," he admitted, his voice barely audible as the sound of distant rain tapping against the window punctuated his confession. David stepped forward, placing a tentative hand on his father's shoulder. "It's never too late to change, Dad," he said softly. "We can't undo the past, but we can try to build a future that honors Mama's memory and your own chance to be whole." The words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between a past steeped in prejudice and a future brimming with the possibility of redemption. In that charged moment, the balance of power shifted dramatically. The room, once a battleground of entrenched beliefs and raw defiance, now became a crucible for transformation. Harold's eyes, heavy with the burden of a lifetime's regrets, finally met Maya's gaze with a mixture of vulnerability and tentative hope. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the single word carrying the weight of years, lost to anger and misunderstanding. "I'm so sorry for all the things I said, for the pain I caused, even if I didn't understand it then." Maya's face softened as she gently reached out to touch his hand, her touch conveying more than words ever could. "There is no need to apologize," she replied quietly. "What matters is that you are here now, willing to listen, willing to see. Change is never easy, and it always begins with a single moment of truth." Her words were like a soothing balm, each syllable a step toward healing the wounds that had festered for so long. The tension that had gripped the room for so many days slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism that shimmered in the eyes of everyone present. Dr. Emily, who had been watching from the doorway with quiet compassion, stepped forward to offer her support. "We are all here because we believe in the power of healing," she said, her voice gentle yet resolute. "Sometimes the greatest medicine is forgiveness, both for others and for ourselves." As the day wore on, the hospital transformed from a place of conflict into a haven of reconciliation. In the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, Harold found himself grappling with a flood of memories, the warmth of his wife's laughter, the gentle guidance she had offered, and the unspoken bond she had shared with Nurse Maya. Each memory was a reminder of a time when love had ruled, untainted by the barriers of fear and prejudice. The revelation of his wife's deep trust in Maya shattered the rigid walls he had built around himself, revealing a chasm of loss that he had long refused to acknowledge. In a tender scene that would mark the turning point of his journey, Harold sat alone by the window in the late afternoon. The soft light of the setting sun bathed the room in golden hues, and for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to feel the full spectrum of his emotions. Tears welled in his eyes as he thought of the woman he had loved and lost because he had been too blinded by his own biases to see the beauty in her choices. With every tear that fell, he felt the weight of regret lift ever so slightly, replaced by a fragile hope that perhaps it wasn't too late to begin again. Outside, the hospital grounds echoed with quiet conversations and soft laughter as families and caregivers mingled, their voices a gentle reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Samuel the janitor paused by the entrance, his eyes reflecting the tender glow of dusk, as if silently acknowledging the miraculous transformation unfolding within. Even the rain, which had been a constant companion throughout the day, seemed to ease into a gentle drizzle, a soft patter that spoke of renewal and the promise of a fresh start. Later that evening, as the corridors grew quiet and the soft hum of night shift activity began to lull the building into a peaceful rhythm, Harold made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. Summoning every ounce of courage he had left, he called out for Nurse Maya. When she appeared, her face illuminated by the gentle light of a bedside lamp, he spoke with a clarity that surprised even him. "Maya," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity, "I need your help. I need to understand, truly understand, what it means to let go of my old self and embrace something better." Maya's eyes shone with compassion as she stepped closer. "It starts with acknowledging the pain," she replied softly. "It starts with accepting that the past, however painful, does not have to define our future. Your wife believed in that truth, and I believe in you too." The simplicity of her words resonated deeply within Harold, stirring feelings that he had long kept locked away. In that moment, the gap between them closed completely, not as patient and nurse, but as two souls reaching out for healing. In the days that followed, Harold began to take small steps toward reconciliation. He engaged in long, reflective conversations with David, slowly mending the frayed ties of their estranged relationship. Together, they walked through the hospital gardens, where the scent of blooming flowers mingled with the crisp evening air, a living metaphor for the delicate rebirth of a wounded heart. Harold listened as David spoke of his own struggles, of the years lost to bitterness and regret, and in turn, he shared memories of his wife that he had guarded so jealously. With each conversation, the walls that had once seemed impregnable began to crumble, replaced by bridges built on understanding and shared sorrow. Maya continued to be a constant source of support and guidance, not just in the hospital, but in Harold's personal journey as well. In quiet moments after her shifts, they would sit together in a small, sunlit corner of the hospital lounge, talking about everything from the simplest joys to the most painful regrets. These conversations, gentle and unhurried, were like seeds planted in fertile soil, each word a promise that growth and change were possible even in the harshest of circumstances. One evening, as a soft rain fell outside and the hospital was bathed in a serene twilight, Harold found himself alone in his room once more. The events of the past days swirled around him like a gentle storm, a tempest of remorse, hope, and the bittersweet taste of redemption. He picked up the letter from his wife once again, reading and rereading the words that had shattered his old world and opened a door to a new one. In that quiet solitude, he made a silent vow to honor her memory by living a life that celebrated compassion over prejudice, love over hate. As the final hours of that transformative day slipped by, the hospital seemed to glow with an inner light, a collective radiance born of healing and forgiveness. Dr. Emily gathered the staff for a brief moment in the corridor, her voice warm and resolute. "Today," she said, "we witnessed something extraordinary. We saw a man confront his demons, a family find its way back to one another, and a community come together to celebrate the beauty of change. Let this be a reminder that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to transform lives." In the gentle murmur of that moment, Harold looked over at Maya, gratitude and sorrow mingling in his eyes. "I have been a fool," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the soft rustle of the night. "I allowed fear to dictate my choices for too long. But now I see that kindness is not a weakness, it is the strength that binds us all together." His words, spoken with a raw honesty, carried the weight of a lifetime of regret and the promise of a new beginning. The following morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the city and the hospital awakened to a fresh start, Harold made a public gesture that would signal his commitment to change. In a small gathering in the hospital's common area, he addressed the staff, patients, and visitors with a humility that touched every heart. "I stand before you today," he said, his voice steady yet laced with emotion, "not as a man defined by my past mistakes, but as someone who is ready to embrace the future with a spirit of love and understanding. I ask for your forgiveness, and I promise to work every day to honor the memory of the one I lost and to rebuild the bridges that I once burned." His words resonated deeply, and in the silence that followed, there was a sense of shared hope, a quiet affirmation that even the most deeply rooted prejudices could be overcome by the transformative power of empathy and love. People from all walks of life came forward, offering their support and sharing their own stories of struggle and redemption. It was a moment of collective healing, a testament to the idea that change, though difficult, is always possible when hearts are willing to open. In the weeks and months that followed, the hospital became a living symbol of reconciliation and growth. Harold's transformation rippled outward, touching the lives of patients, caregivers, and visitors alike. His once impenetrable armor of anger was replaced by a genuine curiosity about the world, a desire to learn, to listen, and to understand. And as he worked to rebuild the fractured bonds with his family, he found solace in the simple acts of kindness that had first begun to heal him. Nurse Maya, too, continued on her path of compassionate care. Her quiet strength and unwavering dedication inspired not only those under her care, but also her colleagues, who marveled at the remarkable changes they witnessed in Harold and in the community around them. In the soft glow of hospital evenings, conversations about prejudice and fear gave way to discussions of hope, resilience, and the boundless potential of the human spirit. As time passed, the hospital became more than just a place of treatment. It became a sanctuary for transformation, a beacon of light in a world too often shrouded in darkness. Harold's journey, marked by pain and regret, but also by courage and redemption, served as a powerful reminder that no heart is beyond healing. His story, interwoven with the compassionate care of Nurse Maya and the enduring love of a family finding its way back to one another, became a living testament to the idea that even the deepest scars can mend when touched by genuine empathy. In the quiet moments of reflection that followed each day, Harold often found himself thinking of his late wife and the gentle soul who had once been her friend. He recalled the laughter they had shared, the whispered confidences, and the unspoken promises of a future built on understanding rather than fear. With every sunrise, he resolved to honor her memory by striving to be better, a man unburdened by the chains of prejudice and filled instead with a profound appreciation for the beauty of human connection. Now, as the hospital settled into a calm evening and the soft strains of a distant melody drifted through its halls, Harold sat by a window, watching the city lights flicker to life. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a freshness in the air that seemed to cleanse the soul. He thought about all that had transpired, the fierce confrontations, the painful revelations, and the tender moments of reconciliation, and he felt a deep, abiding gratitude. In that quiet solitude, he understood that the journey of healing was never truly complete. It was a continuous process of learning, forgiving, and growing. And so, as the final chapter of this long and winding journey drew near, Harold's voice, quiet yet resolute, broke the silence. "Let us remember," he said softly, speaking as much to himself as to anyone who might be listening, "that every act of kindness, every moment of understanding, holds the power to change a life. May we never forget that love is the only true remedy for a wounded heart." His words, simple and unadorned, carried a call to action that resonated far beyond the walls of the hospital, a call for every soul to look beyond differences and embrace the shared humanity that binds us all. In the gentle embrace of that reflective night, as Nurse Maya closed the door to the ward with a serene smile, and Dr. Emily made her final rounds, the hospital stood as a testament to the power of transformation. Every person who had walked its halls had been touched by the quiet revolution that unfolded within, by the realization that even the darkest hearts can be healed by the light of compassion. And as the stars shimmered overhead, promising a new dawn, the story of Nurse Maya and Harold Thompson became a beacon of hope, a living reminder that change, though often born a struggle, is the most profound act of courage there is. The legacy of that day spread quietly through the community, inspiring others to reflect on their own hearts and the ways in which they could foster understanding in a world too often divided by fear. In homes, in classrooms, and in the quiet corners of everyday life, the lessons of compassion and redemption took root. People began to share their stories, to listen more deeply, and to offer kindness without reservation. And slowly, the chains of prejudice that had long bound so many were shattered by the simple, enduring truth that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and loved. As you walk away from this story, carry with you the reminder that transformation begins with a single step, a step taken in the light of empathy and understanding. Whether you are a caregiver, a family member, or simply a seeker of truth, remember that the power to change the world lies within each of us. Let the journey of Harold Thompson and Nurse Maya inspire you to embrace your own capacity for compassion, to forgive where you once held onto anger, and to build bridges where walls once stood. In the soft glow of the coming dawn, the hospital's corridors lay quiet, filled with the gentle promise of a new beginning. And as the city stirred awake, its people carrying the quiet strength of their shared experiences, the call to action echoed in every heart. Share your thoughts, extend your hand to those in need, and believe that even in the deepest darkness, the light of kindness will always find a way. The journey is never truly over. Each day brings with it the opportunity to learn to grow and to redefine who we are. And in that continuous cycle of challenge and change, may you find the courage to be the light in someone else's life, and may you always remember that every act of genuine care has the power to heal and to transform us all. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Your support helps us bring more important stories to light.